I chair the New York City Caring Collaborative, and I just want to welcome our guests, Steve Taibbi, who in his book, Grateful Guilt, Living in the Shadow of My Heart, author Steve uses his story of being a lifelong patient as an analogy for others, so that they too can learn how to successfully use strategies and their own attitudes to successfully confront hospitalization and illness. Steven has been told 3 times he had a year to live, has had 4 open hearts, 2 of them heart transplants, and yet still has managed to have a very fulfilling life. And with that, I want to thank Steve and welcome him and turn the event over to him.
Oh, well, thank you for that. My book, Grateful Guilt, I wrote because I was told that I had to write it by people for many years. And I was told that I had to write it because they thought that people could learn something from what I had been through. And so I decided one day, okay, if it could help people, that's what I'm going to do. So I use my life story as an analogy. It's not a memoir per se, because I don't tell my entire life story. I tell the story as it pertains to my health. And that includes episodes of bullying and how I got over that, which I definitely considered that as part of my health. And it also looked healthcare, the way it has changed from, I'm probably the only person you know who has been in the healthcare system since before the government was involved until all the way now. And looking at, so I was there before there was Medicare and Medicaid. I was there when hospitals, or most of them were charities and things like that. And I was originally at St. Francis Hospital, which was run by nuns. So I've been able to see all the changes going on in healthcare, from how the hospitals are delivering things to just the technological advances, which are stunning. I mean, really, really stunning where we have come from. And it's quite fascinating to look at that aspect of it too. I mean, there was an autoclave in my room when I was a child, and they reused the same needles because they only had the glass needles back then, and the IVs were in glass jars, and they used that red rubber hose, and that red rubber, if anybody remembers from the 50s and the 60s, it was ubiquitous in a hospital back then. So it's an interesting thing to be able to look at that, and to also look at the way patient care for children has changed. Because back when I was in the hospital, child care was, and children were, to be seen and not heard. That's what everybody used to say back then. Children were seen and not heard. And they actually thought that they could talk over you. They actually thought that they could, the doctors could talk to your parents and you wouldn't know what they were saying. And of course, you didn't know when they were using big words what they were saying when you're only 5. But you knew that you were in trouble. You knew you could read your mother and father's faces when they were getting told something. It's always amazed me at how dense they were about how they thought a child couldn't possibly understand that they were in mortal danger, or how a child couldn't possibly understand that they were in trouble, just because they use big words. But that's, one of the changes I've seen happen in healthcare. At this point, sometimes I think they've gone too far the other way, which is not good for the child either. But it's way better than it was, that's for certain. So my book is for the idea that you need a strategy if you want to. Here's the thing: when you walk into a hospital, you want to walk in and you want to walk out, and that's what really my book is for. Is how, when I was a child, as you heard in the intro, I've been told to my face that I have a year to live 3 times. but I've actually been told I have a year to live 5 times, because when I was a child, my parents were told I had a year to live 2 different times. So that's 5 times I've beaten the procrastination that I would be dead in a year. So I always made it a goal to beat that. So it's one of my favorite goals to do is to, my battle cry is I'm still not dead. And I want to maintain that battle cry for as long as I can. I know that one day I won't be able to say that anymore, as will all of us won't be able to. But for now, I'm still kicking and fighting. And that's a lot what this is about. Now, when they first put me in the hospital, I'm assuming you've all read the book. So, Barbara, is that a fair enough assumption that they've all read the book? Or should I give us a brief view of the book? I guess I don't know.
I would talk about the book.
Okay. All right. So just real quick about what, Debbie, everybody's read the book though, right?
I would not make that assumption.
Okay.
They may be waiting to read it afterwards.
Okay. So when I was born with something called Holt-Oram. They didn't know what that was then. They didn't learn what Holt-Oram was until maybe the late 70s, early 80s. I didn't know I had it until I first needed my first heart transplant. Holt-Oram is a birth defect that comes in 3s, which a lot of medical things do, by the way. So it affected my skeletal system, it affected my nervous system, and it affected my venous system. So I was born with what they called crooked thumbs. In actuality, I have 4 index fingers. They work as thumbs, but they're literally 4 index fingers, and both of my quote unquote thumbs are pointed to the left, and they fit into each other. Let's see if the camera could show you. See, these are my thumbs, and they fit into each other. And that was the first birth defect that they noticed. That's 2 of them, and there was a 3rd one. Minor, but these were my first operations. On the day I was born, I was operated on 3 times. They cut the tendon in my thumbs because they thought it was an index finger and that they were being pulled over. So those were my first 3 operations, day I was born. Then I wasn't a thriving child. My mother was a nurse. And my mother was running around like a nut, going from doctor to doctor, saying there's something wrong, there's something wrong. And no doctor would believe her until finally one did. And it's actually when we took an x-ray for the family, because they thought my grandfather had tuberculosis, which fortunately he didn't, but the whole family got the x-ray, and that's when they found my enlarged heart. And heart's enlarged because they're not doing well. And to understand what an enlarged heart is, it means that the heart is pumping so inefficiently. It's getting bigger because the muscles are stretching. As the muscles stretch more, which makes the walls of the heart thinner, the heart gets weaker. So it's a vicious circle. And they discovered that I had a grossly enlarged heart. And next thing I know, I'm in a hospital. And they found out that I had something called ASD. Now, this was the one of the triad, my venous system. My nervous system things, they're showing up more as I get older. So like I have what they call a cookie bite hearing loss, which means that I can hear really well in the high end and the low end, but in the middle, in some circumstances, I don't hear so well anymore. And things like that are continuing to happen. Also, when I rub my eyes, they squeak. You can hear me rub my eyes, and that's part of Holt-Oram. They found out that I had ASD, which is atrial septum defect, which means hole in the heart, which means there's a hole between the walls of the atrium and the upper chamber. And back then, that, of course, this is a birth defect, and that was the cutting edge surgery of the day. And in 1958, when I had my first surgery, the survival rate for children at that, and it was all children because nobody outgrew that. The survival rate was 50%. So I went into that operation, and they found out that I had a vein that was plumb backwards, and that was leaking into my lung. And they had the hole in the heart, and they found out that there was a second hole in the heart. So now I had 2 holes in the heart and a backwards plumb vein. They realized that I was so weak that they didn't think I could survive all the repairs. So they fixed one hole and left the vein and the other hole alone. and sent me home after, some time. And they told my parents what was going on. And they said, well, maybe he'll last a year, but he needs that year to recover. And so that he gets strong enough to come back. And in just about a year, I came back to St. Francis and they went in. And at that time, the survival rate for 2 open heart surgeries for ASD was 0. They were trying all this stuff about bathing children in ice. They had 3 techniques that they wanted to try. I forget what the other one was. And then the one they used on me was the one that worked. But the 2 children before me didn't make it. And when I made it, I was the first child in the world to ever live through 2 open heart surgeries for ASD repair. They sent me home, but they told my parents that I'd be lucky if I made 10. Now, nobody ever told me that they said that to my parents. My mother did years later, but I knew. You always know. And I knew I was still in trouble. I could feel the way my heart worked. I could feel how weak I was. By the way, that year that they sent me home, I was fainting all over the house. So I knew that I was different than other children. I couldn't play the way other children could. I mean, it's not like I don't know how they thought they could get away with not dealing with me, but that's what they did. So, everybody, my parents, the doctors, the nurse, everybody involved. So when I went back and I survived that second operation, that was a miracle. But like I said, they thought I'd only have till 10. Well, I had a feeling that was going on. And I had used a strategy while I was in the hospital the first time. And that strategy was not the healthiest, but it worked. And it was, I disassociated. So I would climb out of my body and go into this cave that I built in my mind. And they could do anything to me. And it is literally true that I never said a word unless I had to in the hospital. And so I was asked a question and I had to. I never said a word. I never even said ouch, no matter how much they hurt me. I just never said anything. I was so deep in my cave. And that caused a lot of problems for me later on in life, but it saved my life. So, but even at the age of 5, I came up with that strategy my first night in the hospital. Maybe the second night, but right away. And that disassociation saved my life. Now I'm back being older and I know I'm still in trouble. And the second thing I started to do was I did this thing called my left foot. My foot is dead is actually what I used to call it. That's the title of a movie. I used to do it with my left foot. That was the confusion. But I used to do this thing about my foot is dead. And I would sit in my room in Indian fashion. And I have my foot on top of, in the Indian pose. And I'd stare at that foot and I'd say, one day this foot is going to be dead. One day this foot is going to be in a casket in complete darkness with a sock and a shoe on it, and it's going to be dead. And I would keep doing that almost as a mantra over and over and over again until I'd go into this like zone. And I felt like by doing this, I was conquering death. I was telling death I wasn't afraid of it. I was telling death, the heck with you, I'm going to beat your ass. That's what I was saying. So I kept doing that, and it got easier and easier to get into that zone. Then it moved into when I'd practice the piano, I'd look at my hand or my hands, and I'd say, one day these hands are going to be dead, and go right back into that same zone. And I did that over and over again. Meantime, I'm getting older, and I passed my due date. Now I was supposed to be 10, then I'm 12, I'm 14. I'm trying to have as normal a life as I can. I go to the doctor. My mother brought me to a new doctor when I was about 15, and he said to me that I was in real trouble. Now, this doctor, I loved him because he treated me like a person. He treated me like an adult, and he talked to me. And at one point, he said to me, "Steven, your heart's in flutter. Your resting heart rate is 140. Your heartbeat is uncontrolled. If this keeps going, it's going to keep getting faster and faster until finally, literally, your heart is going to tear itself apart." I went, okay. And he said, you have about a year. So when I was 16, I went to Long Island Jewish, and I know these are all new, different hospital names now, but that's what it was then. I went to Long Island Jewish, and I got I had a catheterization. And believe me, I mean, when I had my first catheterizations when I was a child, they had to use 4-inch incisions to do it. Now they just stick a line in through after they do a needle, like a puncture. But the puncturing device they used then, they'd already moved up to puncturing, was like medieval. I will always never forget that catheterization. I had nightmares about it for years. But during that catheterization, the doctor comes up to me. I'm 16 years old. I'm going to be 17 in a day, 2 days. And he goes, listen, we need to cardiovert you. And cardiovert is when they electrocute you and stop your heart and then hope it starts again. And he tells me that's what they're going to do. They put a plate on your chest, a plate on your back. They send a current through it. They stop your heart and they wait. And they're hoping that the brain, the heart rate center in the heart connects to the part of the brain that runs the heart. They're just hoping that for them to connect again because it got damaged in the second operation. So what are you going to say? You have to say to the doctor, yeah, sure, go ahead. So I did. And it was really, this is really interesting to me to this day. They didn't go outside of the operating room. They didn't ask my mother. They asked me. And I said, okay. And they did it. Obviously, I woke up to a monitor that had my my heart rate now at 84. And that was the first time I'd seen it in a semi-normal looking thing ever. They sent me home with a bottle of pills called quinidine. And back then that was like a wonder drug. Then it became like a drug you never used. And now it's back in favor again, but for other things. But it turns out that 1 in every 10,000 people is allergic to this drug. And I happen to be one of them. And on my 17th birthday, I couldn't wake up. I just could not wake up. My mother thinks I'm just sleeping in because it's my birthday. Long story short, my heart rate was so low. My mother, like I said, she's a nurse, was horrified. She calls the doctor. He says he's having a quinidine reaction. My mother says, I'll get him to the hospital. He goes, don't move him. He's too fragile. Put him in bed. He said to my mother, she told me later, if he makes it through the night, bring him in the morning. So their best bet was to have me lay down. This is in the book. I don't want to go all through this, but I had a heart block incident in my bed, and it stopped my heart. And I had the whole out-of-body experience that you read about. Mine was a little different than most, actually, in a lot of ways, different than most. But that was a very interesting birthday. And actually still my favorite birthday. That was one of the best things that's ever happened to me. And I was told to come back, and I did. And from that point on, I knew I was fragile, but I thought, well, I've been told I'm going to be okay. The next day I'm in the hospital, and I demanded that they bring a EKG machine into me. And back then, they were the size of, remember the Amana radar ranges, or the original microwave ovens? They were gigantic. And that's how big these were, except they had a little tiny 4-inch window for the readout, which was an oscilloscope readout. And I demanded they bring one in, and they argued with me, and I threatened my doctor that I'd jump up and down until he gave it to me, which meant I would have killed myself. And he believed me, and he better had, because I really meant it. And they wheeled it in. They taught me how to use it. And for the next day and a half, all I did was stare at that screen and stare at it and say, beat, beat. What I had done was I figured out biofeedback on my own. And the doctor had resisted me on this. He had told my parents that he didn't think I'd make it through that night. And obviously I did. Later in the doctor's office, he told me, and this is a quote, "The only reason why you're alive is you." And he thought what I did with the biofeedback, which we didn't have a name for it then, was brilliant. And I don't know, something told me I had to do it. It wasn't, I'm going to tell you, it wasn't me that did that. Something came to me and told me, you have to do this. So I did. So now I have a very irregular heartbeat. And my doctor says to me, Steven, You beat this, but I don't know if you're going to make 21. Okay, doc. And I just started to chase life with a hammer. I was doing everything I wanted to do. And I actually ended up going to college and starting a career. And I keep going past what the doctor says is going to happen. Years later, on just before my 34th birthday, the doctor says to me, I'm in his office and he's looking at my EKG and he's just staring at the strip. And he's like, what? And I'm looking at him because I've never seen him like this. And he looks up at me and he goes, Steven, he goes, I don't know what you did, but you beat it. Your EKG is exactly like a normal person's. He goes, I don't know what you did, but you beat it. Go out and live. So I went out and on my 34th birthday, I bought a glider, sailplane, to celebrate my being told I was going to live on the 17th anniversary of my almost dying on my 17th birthday. Of course, I hadn't told my doctor I had become a pilot because he had told me I wasn't allowed to, but he didn't know that you could become a glider pilot if all you had was a driver's license. You didn't need a doctor's note like you do on a regular airplane with a power airplane. So I was flying gliders for about 2 years before I told him. And he turned so many colors, I couldn't tell you. I mean, he was mad at me. And he goes to me like this, right to my nose about it. He goes, whatever you do, no acrobatics. So a week later, I'm taking acrobatics. And that was one of my strategies all along, is I always did the opposite thing that the doctors did, because I always felt like they were trying to coddle me, that they were trying to keep me safe. And in my mind, that was what was going to kill me. In my mind, I had to challenge my heart. I had to always do more than they said I could do. And apparently, if we're looking at the results, I was right about that. So that was another one of my strategies. Now, nowadays, after 2 heart transplants, that's the exact opposite of what I do. I do what I feel. I'm very connected to myself. And and if my body says, no, that doctor's wrong, I listen to my body. If my body goes, yeah, you should listen, I listen. I'm the most compliant patient on earth. So, I get this wonderful thing. I'm in television. I have a great business going. I have an airplane at the airport. I have a trailer at the airport. I'm staying sometimes 4 days a week at the airplane with the airplane, flying and having a good time. And I know I can't see you, and I know you, but how many of you have ever been doing everything right? Everything was perfect, and then suddenly you say to yourself, I'm going to do something different, and you wreck everything. That's right, I got married. So I met Rose and we got married. I'm really thrilled that I met Rose. She's really the answer to a prayer, in all honesty, but I don't have an airplane or a trailer at the airport anymore. So that's its own thing. But Rose and I have been together for 30 years now. Anyway, that Rose and I get married. We buy a house in Huntington, New York, where everything is great. We have nice cars. I changed businesses. I was doing well. Rose was doing well. She's a cancer nurse. We had a little pug who was peeing all over the house. So I mean, everything was perfect. And then one day I just started to notice I couldn't breathe. And I started to put on weight, all in my belly, nothing on my ankles. That's usually the first sign that there's a cardiac problem, when your ankles swell. My ankles never swelled. I'd go to my doctor, I can't breathe. I wore a Holter. That's a monitor that does an EKG on you for 24 hours. Nothing. I'm walking with my friend Larry, a cameraman I made friends with, who just died of cancer. I'm still mourning Larry. He was my best friend in the world. And I'm walking with Larry and I suddenly collapse. I scare the hell out of Larry. Larry drags me back to the house. He wants to call an ambulance. I won't let him. He wouldn't leave until I recovered. But I can't breathe. I'm like a goldfish out of who flopped onto the floor. I can't breathe. Finally, I'm able to breathe again, and I call my doctor, tell him what happens, and the next day I go to Huntington Hospital for a stress test. The stress test is a lot like a hamster in a wheel. They put you on a treadmill and they wire you up and they have you do various tests, and they do nuclear tests and everything along with it to check blood flow. but first thing they do is put you on the treadmill. And I'm on the treadmill making jokes about how unnecessary all this is for literally 30 seconds when I start to collapse. One of the doctors catches me. They lower me to the ground and they start giving me oxygen. So while I was being given oxygen, Rose was being told that her husband was in end-stage heart failure. So that was a real shock. And then a day later, the next day, my doctor calls me and he tells me, Steven, you are in heart failure, you're in heart block, you're in partial liver failure, you're in partial lung failure, all accessory to the heart failure. And he says, you're going to need a heart transplant. Now, I broke down on my desk and I cried for about, I don't know, some minutes. But when I was done crying, I was done. I was done because I know some things. And I know that if you're sick and you're crying, that's not good. If you're feeling sorry for yourself when you're sick, you're asking for death. You're asking for things to be worse. Trust me on this. I'm trying to help everybody. If you're sick, you have to be bigger than the sickness. You have to have attitudes and confidence. And even if you're being given a death sentence that's going to be true, you still have to act like this. So I got over it. I started to put on my armor, as I called it, more strategies. This is all strategies. I started to put on my armor. I started to stand up tall, and I was going, all right, I'm going to have another battle. I've won several already. I'm going to win this one. And I had another heart transplant. I had a heart transplant, and that went really well. And I had a lot of strategies involved in that transplant, in that hospitalization. And then that transplant went pretty well, but I was so sick. They were having, just as an aside, New York State is number 50 out of 50 in the United States for organ donation. We are the worst state. We should all be very ashamed of that. We are the worst state. Mississippi does better than us. We are the worst. When I needed my second heart transplant, my doctor said to me, listen, I have a friend in California. I told him all about you. I want you to fly out to him. And I said to her, Donna, are you telling me to go to California because you don't think I'll survive the wait here? And she goes, yeah. So I had to fly out to LA to get my second organ, where they have so many of them. While I was there on the same floor as me, there were 5 other people there from Columbia Presbyterian. 5 other people on the same floor. There were people from Germany there while I was, and everybody gets hearts out there because the waiting time, they told me when I came in, they said their record was a guy came in and 3 hours later he had his heart. In New York, the waiting list is over 1.5 years. I should have only had to wait 1 to 3 weeks, but my first day there, they gave me sepsis and I almost died my 4th night there. And that put me off the list for 3 weeks. And I didn't have 3 weeks at that time, but I made it through that and I got the other transplant. And grateful guilt is all the strategies, which I've only touched on a couple of them here. It's all about the strategies that I've used. It's about how I got through my life. It's about it's a lot of humor in it too. I happen to think if you look at the it's a 5-star review book on Amazon. It was an Amazon bestseller. And I'm very proud of the writing. I've been writing professionally since I was 20. And I just wanted it to help people, but it's also very funny at places. And I wanted it to be something that would be easy to read and fun to read and want to read. But it's also had some really interesting things have happened from it. For example, a nurse who read it wrote me and told me that she gave it to her personal doctor and another doctor that she knew. And I've been finding out that patients are giving this book to their doctors, and that's just what I want. And right now, I'm going through I'm in a process because I'm trying to become. I'm in a movement. I started a movement where I want doctors and patients to understand each other better for better outcomes, and for the fact that doctors and patients don't communicate that well, and they don't. And it's equally between the doctors and the patients. It's not the doctor's fault. It's not the patient's fault. It's an equal thing. And I've spent a lot of time in hospitals, way more than I wish I had. And I've seen a lot of things. And I've seen doctors act like jerks, and I've seen patients act like jerks. And that's because we're all human. We could all be jerks. And I use that word deliberately. And I speak to doctors now. I speak to a lot of doctors now, and I use that word. And they acknowledge, yeah, we can be jerks. And patients, you can be jerks. I saw at Cedars a woman who was going so nuts, and she wasn't a psych case. She was just a woman who would let her anger get so, and really that's a part of fear. She let it get so out of control that there were 5 security people in the room with her, 5, trying to get this woman to calm down. Now, I ask you, if you go into a hospital and you're such a jerk that 5 security people have to come into your room, how good do you think your care is going to be? Seriously, think about that. How good is your care going to be if you're going to be screaming and yelling at doctors? If you think that that's how you got ahead in business, by screaming and yelling at people, which a lot of people do, and you think that's going to work in a hospital? No, it's not going to work. What works in a hospital is if you make it so that the doctors and the nurses want to come in and see you. That's the trick. They want to be with you. They want to be in your room. Then when they leave the room, they go, gee, you know, we really have to help this guy. We really have to help this woman. We really have to help this kid, whoever it is. Make them want to be in your room. Make them know that you appreciate them. Thank everybody all the time. I thank everybody so profusely all the time. But here's the real part about that. It has to be genuine. You can't just be, you have to really mean it. And to really mean it, you have to take stock of the person, and you have to acknowledge what's good about them. And you have to say, gee, you're really doing this well. Thank you so much, because I know that's helping me. Tell you a quick story. When I was in Cedars, I had a custodian. I think they call him housekeeping, but it's the same. And he was this guy, big guy, and his head was down, and he looked like, you know, he felt like he was doing a job that was, you know, a low-end job. You could see he didn't feel good about it. And I was watching him, and he was doing a good job. So I stopped him and I said, excuse me. I said, what's your name? And he told me his name. And I said, I'm Steven. Nice to meet you. I forgot his name. That's 5 years. I mean, I'm having trouble remembering breakfast. And see, he goes up, and I said to him, well, I wanted to thank you because I'm watching you and I see what a good job you're doing. And I know that you're part of my health team, that because you keep my room so clean, you're keeping me safe from infection, that you're as much of the team member as my doctor is. And I want to thank you for doing such a good job. Well, he stood up. He was 4 inches taller than he was when he first walked into the room. And the pride on his face was really spectacular. Now, what did I gain from that? I didn't do it for gain. I did it because it was the right thing to do, but I gained from it, as we always do when we do the right thing. I had the cleanest room in the hospital, I'll tell you that. That guy cleaned my room within an inch of his life every day. He went out of his way to clean my room spectacularly. And I let management know what a great job he was doing. I told management how great I liked him. How many patients compliment the custodial staff, really? And he just wanted to be in my room. And every time I talked to him about his kids, I talked to him, we'd just talk. That's how you walk out of a hospital, by doing things like that. There's so many tricks and so many things that you do as a patient to make it so that you walk out of the room when you're done. And instead of being taken out in a wheelchair or in a body bag, let's be honest about it. So the most important thing, though, and I have this in the book, is that you have to be grateful for everything. You have to live in an attitude of gratitude. You have to You know, one of the things doctors run into a lot is the ungrateful patient. I don't mean ungrateful towards them. I mean ungrateful towards themselves for their own lives. So you have a patient who's moaning and complaining and everything happens to me. Why does this happen to me? By the way, that's the worst thing you could say, and you should never say it to me because I'll be in your face. Why me? Why me? Why me? That's whiny. Why me is death. Drop why me. The heck with why me. The answer to why me is why not you? Why not you? What, are you special? All of us have things happen to us. That's the way it is. That's just life. So why me is the worst thing you can say. But when you've got somebody who's ungrateful, I tell doctors what they should do is remind them gently. I want them to gently coax them into a attitude of gratitude if they can. But sometimes with people who are like that, I don't know if it's possible, but are you in a hospital? Do you have a roof over your head? Do you have warm blankets? Are you getting fed? Do you have an entire staff that's dedicated to trying to make you better? You have so much to be grateful for instead of concentrating on the things that are bad. I could have been going, why me? This is when I was having my fourth open heart operation for my second transplant. This has been going on all my life. I've never said why me. It doesn't occur to me to say that because that would be death. That would be ungrateful for everything I've already gotten. I have Rose, for gosh sakes, I have Rose. I have a house, I have dogs, I have cars, I have food, I have clothing. I have people who love me. I have a cornucopia of things to be grateful about. I can't even name all the things I should be grateful about. And if you find yourself getting into that why me kind of a thought, turn it around. It's the healthiest thing you can do for yourself and start counting your blessings. I don't care if you believe in God or not. I don't care what religion you are. You have blessings. You have a roof. Are you warm? Are you fed? Are you alive? Do you have clothing on your back? You can be grateful for those things. That's what you have to do. You have to learn how to turn things around, how to make things so that adversity becomes an advantage. And that's what I've been doing my whole life. And I've always turned adversity into an advantage. And I don't know, one of the things my parents did, they had a strategy, was they never allowed me to feel like I was sick. I was never, when I came back from those hospital visits, I wasn't allowed to be a little sick boy. I wasn't allowed to sit in bed all day. I was told to go out and play. I was told to do everything. I had to do chores. I had to do everything my siblings had to do because my parents thought that if I started to think I was sick, I would be sick. And it's the truth. I would have. And I picked up from what they did. Now they carried it a little too far, but that's common. But I overcame it. But I wouldn't have overcome anything if it wasn't for the fact that my parents had been that way in the first place. So an attitude of gratitude is, in my mind, the key to life. It's the key to happiness. It's the key to everything. If you're grateful, they always say nature works it always fills a vacuum. Well, if you are not grateful, then you're something else. And that something else is going to be negative. You're going to be angry. You're going to be fearful. You're going to be, eventually that all turns into hate. If you displace those thoughts and fill them instead with gratitude, there's no room for those thoughts. There's no room for negativity. There's no room for you to think ill things. At the age of 6, when I was getting last rites, I'm Catholic and I was in a Catholic hospital. I was getting last rites before my next operation because no one had lived through one before. And the 2 children before me didn't live through them either. So, they were trying 3 different things and I was going to be the 3rd one. And so my parents asked, I don't know if it was my parents, it probably was, that I get last rites. Now, you can't give last rites to an Italian Catholic kid. and not have them know what it is. But my parents somehow thought that might work, that I wouldn't know. And I couldn't allow those last rites to be as somber as the priest would have liked. So I found any excuse I could to giggle, like when he was putting the oils on me. I would giggle and I was laughing. I would not allow how solemn a deal this was to get into me. I thought it would make me weaker for the next day. I knew I was going into battle. I didn't know exactly what it was, but that's what I'm saying about, they underestimated children back then, but I knew I was in mortal danger. And now getting last rites, that certainly drove the point home, didn't it? But I wouldn't allow it in. I wouldn't let it crack my foundation. And I did that at the age of 6. Imagine what we can do at our ages now. We can do anything we want. We can be anything we want. It's all about our attitudes, and attitude is everything. And an attitude of gratitude is the most important one of all the attitudes that you could have, as far as I'm concerned. So that's part of the book. I've left out a lot of the strategies because I'm hoping that you'll read them. And I think they'll be more powerful if you read them rather than me just talk about them. But I think I was told that about this time we'd start with questions. So I'd like to say, are there any questions?
If you have questions, you can use the chat feature at the bottom of your, it's probably at the bottom of your screen. It's a little gray box. Doesn't look like there are any questions.
Oh, is that good? I can't believe that.
And I think it was very interesting.
Do you have a question?
Well, my story is very similar to yours, except that it wasn't as critical. You know, I was hospitalized for the last time when I was 19. I'm a type 1 diabetic, and I made it so that the interns and residents would hang out in my room when they were on break, you know, just for fun. And I find the sense of humor has helped me through a lot of things.
Yes, sense of humor is vital.
Yeah.
I got to tell you something, Barbara. When I was in Cedars, and when they moved me from one room to another 2 days afterwards, when I went from being ambulatory to not being ambulatory, and when I started getting tied to the wall with tubes, they bring you into a room, and you know there's that big whiteboard, and it has what name you prefer to be called by. So she says to me, do you prefer to be called Steve or Steven? And I said, Steven, but really, Your Majesty. So I was just kidding, right? And she goes, all right, that's it, Your Majesty. She writes Your Majesty on the board. Now, the protocol at Cedars is that's what you have to call the patient. And she knew that. I love this nurse for doing this. And it was hysterical. And doctors would come into the room for the first time, they'd look at the board and they'd crack up. And they did, and they'd call me Your Majesty, because that's what it said on the board. They had to. And it became the biggest joke. Everybody on the floor knew about me and Your Majesty. Everybody on the floor. And it became the biggest joke. It was really funny.
We are getting some questions now. The first one is, what do you suggest when the doctor is acting like a jerk?
I'm sorry, what?
What do you suggest when the doctor is acting like a jerk?
Now that's a tough one, because I've had doctors act like real jerks. And well, one doctor I fired. I fired him because he invaded my privacy. I told him to wait for a second while I was in the bathroom. He just burst in, and I fired him. And I told him that he better not charge me for that day. And I thought, I don't never want to see you again. So that's the extreme. But when you're a patient and he's acting like a jerk, and that's the problem with the doctor acting like a jerk. I'll tell you a true story. When I was in Cedars, I had a doctor come to my bed and start talking politically to me. Now, I'm a patient. I don't want to hear your politics. I don't care. Politics have no business in this environment. And he's telling me political things in a very angry, nasty way. He has no idea who I am. He has no idea what my politics are. But there he is. Now, whether I agreed with his politics or I didn't is not the point. The point is, if I did if I didn't, what would I say? What am I supposed to do? If I did, it's completely unprofessional and inappropriate. Now, this guy was one of the deciders to find out if I'd be accepted in the transplant program. So that's an immense amount of power to have over me, to be acting like such a jerk. What could I do? I could do nothing. I could do nothing but just sit there and go, okay, sure, and that's
Yeah.
just wrong. That's just a wrong thing to do. You can also use humor to break up a doctor from being a jerk. But I'm talking to a lot, like I told you, I'm in this movement. I started this movement about making doctors and patients communicate better. And I tell the doctors, the same doctors, this is statistically true, it's the same doctors who get sued. So when we get this arrogant doctor, we all have met them, male and female. Fortunately, they're few and far between these days. But when you get these people and you want to slap them, and I use that word deliberately because what the patients do is they slap them with a lawsuit. So that's another thing happens when you're, now that's the other thing for doctors. If a patient likes you, they're not as likely to sue you. So I'm sorry, it's not the greatest answer, but it depends on your situation. And sometimes you just have to endure them being a jerk, unless you can change doctors or talk to another doctor. Yes, I had a doctor who was scaring the heck out of me. And I kept telling him, and he wouldn't listen. And I finally went to the chief and I said, listen, he's scaring me. I want him to stop talking to me about this. He won't listen to me. And the next time I saw him, he was mad at me. He was mad, but I didn't care. I didn't care because he was scaring me. And he was hurting my ability to be the one who heals.
Okay, we have a few more questions. Can you speak to the connection between attitude and depression stemming from physical conditions?
Well, sure. I mean, my physical days, I had to learn how to walk again after the last operation. It took me 2 years. It took me 2 years to get over the second transplant. I've been disabled, barely able to move. So I know all about that. Some people know about it more than I do, granted, but I know about it. It's still everything. It's still, are you being fed? Does somebody love you? Are you in a house? Are you in an apartment? Are you housed? Do you have clothing? Can you go out and enjoy the day? Can you do something to entertain yourself? Attitude is the key. It is absolutely the key. And something I learned a long time ago, if you're depressed and you look straight up like this and smile, it's impossible to be sad after a few seconds of that. It's amazing. So this is actual science says that. So I follow those kind of sciences. So yes, there's a big connection between attitude and depression. And you'll find that most people are depressed. I have a friend who's very depressed, and all you hear out of her is negative. It's just negativity. It's a stream of negativity. And she doesn't understand that she's feeding herself, no matter how many times I try to tell her. So some people you just can't reach that way. But if somebody's cogent enough to ask that kind of a question, if you know somebody like that, then usually you can start to guide them out of it, and just with attitude.
Okay. Next question. What's your strategy for developing mental toughness to overcome realism? I think you talked a little bit about that throughout your...
The strategy to that is to just do it. It doesn't matter if you're scared. You don't think I've been absolutely terrified? I mean, terrified in hospitals, absolutely. But it doesn't change anything. It's like going into battle. It's like a soldier who has to run out of the trench into the oncoming bullets. It's no different. That's what we're doing when we're sick in a hospital. We're jumping out of the trench and going towards the enemy. Sometimes you're going to win, sometimes you're not. That's just life. But that's what you have to do. You just have to. And the more you do stuff like that, the more you face what you're afraid of, the more you find out you really didn't have to be afraid of it. And fear is a killer. It's a killer of your attitude. It's a killer of the quality of your life. And eventually it will actually kill you. I mean that literally. So you want to get rid of those things. So practice being tougher just by doing it over and over again. It's just like exercising. You can't lift up that weight, but you do it enough times and suddenly it weighs nothing. That's how you do it.
And the last question is pretty much the same. You talked about this a little, but how do you mentally forget about all the medical things, especially the life-threatening aspects, and continue to live your life?
You don't
And-
make room for them. You like I said, nature loves a vacuum. You don't let a vacuum be there. You do. Look, I've had nightmares about some of the things that have happened to me multiple times, multiple different kinds of nightmares. I've had horrific things happen to me. And I literally mean horrific. There's a photograph. I was going to give it to Debbie to put up, but when I came out of my second transplant, there were 13 pumps next to my bed, plus a feeding machine and a ventilator. Think about it. My wife took a photograph of it. It's out of science fiction. That is incredibly unusual for a heart transplant to have all that. All those things happen to you, they affect you, but you can't dwell on them. You went through all that because you want to be alive. So be alive. So that's the past. And now you have the present, which is what you fought so hard for. So just don't make room for it. There's no point. Did it happen? Of course it happened. Was it bad? Sure, it was bad. So what? People have had worse things happen to them than what happened to you. People have had worse things happen to them than what happened to me. That's the way it is. You just have to, buck up and face it and just move on. It doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It doesn't mean you're not thinking about it sometimes. But if you're filling your life with life, then you don't have time or room for that. And you'll find that it gets pushed aside far enough that it doesn't bother you. And it's not that you're not paying attention to it. It's not that you're ignoring it. It's not you're doing any of those kind of things that aren't healthy. It's that you're so healthy, you have no room for it. And it can't affect you. Does that answer that?
I think so. I have a couple of more questions here. Please talk about how your wife and friends fitted into your care support team.
Amazingly. That's one of the things I have to be grateful for. I have great friends like Debbie. I have great friends, and I have a great wife. Rose took 5 months off from her job, and this is an extension of that. She didn't have that many sick days. She was in danger of losing her job. So what did all her friends do? The nurses got together and gave Rose their days. Talk about that's pretty amazing, isn't it? Rose only lost 2 weeks of pay from 5 months. Rose was with me oddly enough, the times when I needed her the most, she wasn't there. But she was living in the hospital, then she'd go home, and that's when I needed her. But we had an apartment out there, obviously. And but Rose was sleeping in a chair or in a cot next to me most of the time. She was, I honestly think that Rose helped save my life. So she fit in. My friend Larry, my friend Conchetta, my friend Joe, everybody, all my friends were were on my team and adding strength to me. Now, the one thing that's I'm odd about is I don't let anybody visit me in the hospital. The only person who could visit me in the hospital is Rose, because I don't like people seeing me like that. It makes me feel weaker. So I don't let it happen. The only person who could see me is Rose, and but Rose was there all the time. But if you're a kind of person who needs to see people in the hospital and you have them, then do it. You have to do what's right for you.
Okay. The last question, were you satisfied with the care that you got at Cedars?
Yes and no. I'll be honest. Yes and no. It's drowning in money because all the Hollywood people give it money. I mean, a common donation to them is $250 million, literally. Another common donation for them is $25 million. All the Hollywood people like to have their names on the building, so they're drowning in money. But they almost killed me several times, and I can't say that about Columbia. But Columbia, if I'd stayed at Columbia, I wouldn't have gotten the heart. So, you know, I would have died there. And that's not the outcome I was looking for. I think the staff tried very hard. I liked the staff very much. Everybody did everything that they were supposed to do. They were good. I can't quite put my finger on it. I don't think they were as good as Columbia. They're an excellent hospital. They're certainly one of the best hospitals in the country. But I still think Columbia is better.
I think that was our last question. So I just want to thank you on behalf of everybody. If you want to unmute yourselves and thanks Steven. Now you're able to do that.
No,
Well,
they're not, because I have everyone.
Oh, they're not.
on mute,
Oh, okay.
So, but I know everyone's very grateful. It was a
and I
great job.
I would like to thank everybody for coming and spending their time with me. Your time is valuable, and I appreciate that you spent it with me. So everybody, thank you.
Well, we appreciate it. Thank you. And continue to stay healthy.
Thank you. It's the plan.
Okay.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Bye.